Okay. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Earmarks and How to Prepare the Ask. Um, I am really thrilled to welcome you and our speaker this afternoon. I think so many of us have questions about congressionally directed spending, just generally, and so I'm excited to just be able to cover this topic right now. But first, a couple of housekeeping things. I love to see your names. I see everyone has their name, and if you want to also put your organization or your consulting business, that's great. Use it as like a little bit of networking, and also we can ask questions of each other. Upcoming programs. All programs of GPLH are free for our members. So we have a connections call coming up October 10th at 9:30. And then we're planning another connections call, sort of a holiday theme one. It'll be a little more fun and a little more networking on December 12th. We try and do those calls every other month. Anyone who's new to this, that's sort of a time where we just jump on and we share intel, we share problems, we ask each other questions. It's confidential, very collegial. We really are helpful of one another. So I hope you'll join us for those too. Also, our fearless leaders, Maureen Fox and Deborah Brown, will be representing us at ADO's Meet the Experts conference on Wednesday, October 16th at 8 a.m. That will be held at Sam's of Gedney Way. So I hope to see some of you there. That's always an interesting event, Meet the Experts, every other year. If you are not a member and you paid for this particular event, you can apply the cost of today's event to your full membership. So if you go to the address that I just put in the chat, you can apply the money to the full membership and you can join us throughout the year. We will be sending an email with the recording of this as well as the slides for today after this meeting. I'll also be sending a survey, which is very helpful for us for determining future programs, any questions, making these as great as we can. And we're always looking for members to join us on the program committee. So if you're interested, let us know. Please mute yourself until the end. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. And then there should be time for some Q&A also at the very end. All right, Maureen, you want to take it back?
Yeah, thank you. I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker and my friend, Pernell Brice III, Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Children's Health Fund. Pernell oversees CHF's public policy, government affairs, and advocacy agendas. Through coordination and collaboration, Pernell directs CHF's relationship with advocacy groups, healthcare providers, and public and private entities. He is focused on elevating and expanding access to healthcare at the local, state, and federal levels. Pernell has had a 20-plus year career in philanthropic and research consulting arenas, leading public-private ventures impacting communities regionally and across the country. He began his career in politics as an opposition researcher for President Clinton, followed by experiences as a staffer for former New Jersey United States Senator Robert Torricelli and a lobbyist for Manette Phillips. Say that 3 times fast. He studied at Duke University and the University of Pennsylvania's Phelps Center for Government. Welcome, Pernell, and thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Maureen. Quite embarrassed. I didn't realize that I'd given you so much for my bio. It's not that important, but thanks for reading it. I appreciate it. Super excited to be here today to discuss this issue that many people hear about but don't really know the ins and outs. And so yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. And yeah, if you want to share your screen, Maureen, happy to get started. So while she's bringing that up, as you all know, earmarks or appropriations, and yeah, thanks. So the name is kind of interchangeable, but earmarks are provisions set aside in legislation to direct funding to specific projects, or to direct funding to particular organizations. This is a way that the federal government, particularly the representatives, are able to you know, reach out and, be respectful to their constituents' wishes, right? And so, because that's why they're supposed to be there. And so, through this process, it's an opportunity for, the representatives to try to find, solutions, based on what their constituents submit, that'll be impactful in their respective districts. Next slide. And so here's just a brief history that I'll go through real quickly. I mean, earmarks have been around for a while, since the 1980s, but they really picked up steam when I was there. So 1990s through 2007. And so, as you all probably have heard, another name that you hear from earmarks is pork, right? And so it really got that name during this period because legislators would really, put in any type of provisions to help people back home in the districts. During those times, and why they called it pork was that there was no transparency. And so you didn't have to really attach your name as the representative to your ask. And also, the person requesting didn't necessarily have to disclose their name for public purposes. So after all that, 2007, 2010 is when they tried to clean it up a little bit. Because prior to that, it was, I would say appropriations were maybe around 20 to 25% of the federal budget, which is, I mean, as you can imagine, is pretty significant. So, but 2007 and 2010, they cut that down to maybe around between 1 and 2%. Um, and then after 2010, with the Tea Party and all that, we'll talk about politics in a few slides over. There was a 10-year moratorium. And so, earmarks, appropriations as we know them, were kind of dormant. But in 2021, earmarks are back because, people or representatives understand, if managed effectively, it's not only good for people and organizations in the district, but it's good for them in terms of the reelection. So they decided to bring them back. Next slide, please. So here I just wanted to really go through just sort of the timeline of the federal earmark process. So, right now, through December, and before I go forward, I was going to do this beginning. Just show of hands, how many people have done a application before, federal or state? Okay, most folks. Okay. So for some of you, you already know this. So this is like the time right now to really, understand, develop your idea, what you hope to pitch per se when you submit your application. January through February is when, they'll have information on each respective legislator's website that will, give you, different directions on how to apply and different links. And then March through July is when they begin to review it. And as I mentioned, in terms of the transparency, now they publish all the appropriation applications online, for transparency purposes. And so that's usually around this period. And then August through September is when, they really start to finalize decisions. Next slide. So kind of drilling down to what I talked about in this previous slide, developing your idea, right? And so you really, as many of you all know who've done it before, you really want to make sure well, I'm speaking to the choir, right? Because not only have you guys done appropriations, you guys probably do grants all the time. So you want to make sure your project and idea is clearly defined. The goals, the objectives, the metrics, and clear evidence, particularly from respected folks in your district, who can support, the need of your project. If you haven't already, it's very important to build relationships with these offices. You don't want to just submit a cold application to an office, because you're competing with, hundreds of other organizations, many who have larger budgets, particularly budgets for lobbying shops, who will be advocating on behalf of their client to these legislators for their earmark application. Um, and it can be whether, a phone call. The thing is most staff members, they know that, folks will be reaching out. And most of the time people are open. So what I would say is persistency is key. You may not get a response immediately, but if you start reaching out now and, kind of, let people know that, hey, we're going to probably submit something for fiscal year, 26. These are some of our ideas. Would love to just share with you. Um, within an email introducing your organization in general, it can only be helpful. And in terms of like preparing the proposal, as I said, make sure that it's clear and as detailed as possible. And you want to make sure that you have a budget attached to it. And what's really important is, because it relates back to transparency, what are your expected outcomes, right? And so, particularly when you're competing with other educational institutions, cultural institutions, um, the impact doesn't have to be as massive as they are, but it has to be clearly defined. If it's not real, these staffers, they'll be able to understand it. Don't just throw out, numbers just so because you want to make it look real. Make sure that the numbers are in fact legitimate. And then, submit the request. As most of you all know who've done it before, you go online. Right now it's fairly easy. It's pretty much like a Google form, and checking off certain things. You can upload your application. Um, and yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process. And then lastly, and hopefully at this point you've built a reservoir of goodwill and relationships, follow up. And the follow-up should be not just you or members of your organization, but also people within your network who can advocate on behalf of your proposal and also have good relationships with the representative who you're submitting the earmark to. And so whether it's other nonprofits, whether it's other leaders, clergy, what have you, anybody that has an ear to the representatives, you definitely want them to advocate on your behalf, because it really has to be like a campaign effort. If a groundswell of people are talking about the reasons why this proposal should really get a second look, they'll take a listen. But it's very important because, as I mentioned, you're competing against other well-funded interests. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, in terms of the history of the earmarks, when I mentioned around the Tea Party, politics is always an issue, right? And so, who's in power, as many of you know, really makes a difference, not just in terms of legislation, but particularly around this issue. And so, even though earmarks are back, with the Republicans who are in power, they've limited sort of the amount of earmarks that are really being pushed through, that is on the House side. And so the Democrats are still overseeing the Senate side. So most folks sometimes have better chances going through their U.S. Senate office. Again, there are some earmarks that do go through on the House side, just not as many, because the Republicans want to be a little bit more um, stringent in terms of how they allow certain earmarks to go through, even though, as I mentioned, it would help them as well because you're helping your constituents. Competition, as I mentioned before, I'll just share, in terms of the organization I represent, we didn't advance. And we did pretty well. We did everything that I said, but when you're competing against Lincoln Center and, Columbia, these are some of the, the folks, other educational institutions, it's challenging. And I would say probably 80% of the folks that moved forward were large scale educational and cultural institutions. And then public scrutiny, like I said, you want to make sure that, um, what you're doing, there's a real need for your community, because everything will be publicized on the internet. People can scroll through, not just in terms of the title and sort of the focus, but also the amount of money that you're asking. And so you want to make sure that everything is buttoned up. And so, yeah, that's really the overall process. I mean, given that many of you have done it before, would love to hear, has anybody been successful submitting and receiving an earmark? Lydia, and who do you represent?
It was lifting up Westchester. It was the Department of Labor. We got for a workforce development program, and it was a couple of $100,000. I think it was like 250 or something. So it was nice.
And when was this? Was this recently?
Just recently, just this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Who's your representative?
You know what?
Well, who cares? You got the money,
I got the money. I did a bunch of them for a number of clients, so that's why I'm hesitant. I don't work, for that one client only. So
Got it. Yeah, and so
Lisa,
no, go ahead.
Lisa has her hand up.
Typical of the process, a few years ago, I got funding through Mondaire Jones through the House and the infrastructure bill, I think. But then, of course, didn't go beyond that. So you're excited to get that first step approval, but then you have to make it all the way to the president's desk. So it's a long, challenging process.
And Lisa, you probably did, but once you made it through, did you continue to reach out to different folks to, help push it forward?
Probably not as much as we should have. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that today, the follow-up with keeping it going.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said, I don't want you to be discouraged. You're going against some real big boy, big girl shops, right? And so, but again, if you know somebody that really has the ear of, these different representatives, they will tell their staff, well, listen, Miss Lisa Bender and, Reverend or Doctor, reached out to me, and we at least have to have a meeting with them. So, yeah, definitely don't take that for granted. It can really make a difference, because again, like I said, I understand you get really excited. You see, they send you this email, and so you see it. But once they get into the room with other staff members, that's when things really change. You really want to make sure that you're at least in the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. That's really important to remember.
Absolutely.
yeah, I just looked it up. It was Bowman. It was 240,000.
Okay. Yeah, I
It's
just saw
last year, but
Jamal.
they've been going through the process with the paperwork and all the things. Yes.
Yeah, I just saw Jamal in DC during the Congressional Black Caucus conference. So yeah. So looks like you'll have some new leadership. But yeah, that's great.
Pernell, can you maybe talk a little bit about, so like Lydia just said, it's been a couple of years, right? It's a process. So even just getting the okay doesn't stop the process, right? There's still things that have to get done. Can you talk a little bit about, because I know some EDs are going to look at, well, yeah, they said yes, when's the money coming? And it takes a while for that money to actually come.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, what I'll say is it's a little bit better than New York City, but not always a lot. And so, yeah, I mean, you have to really make sure that you know, not only have, necessary liquid resources, but as you all know, dealing with some of the city or state, you have to sometimes also have a line of credit, while you're waiting for these resources to come in, which is, you know, obviously very challenging, because, you know, the application process and all that stuff. But yeah, it can definitely take some time. Lydia, so you said you got accepted this round, right? This most recently? You're on mute, Lydia.
Sorry, last year,
Last year.
year ago, early in 2023. And then they heard, I think it was around Christmas, but they're still going through the process of getting all them.
So you haven't received anything?
No, and of course, the challenge is that they received money to do part of that project that they had asked for, because the process has been taking so long.
Right.
So they're in the process of trying to change the ask slightly. And
And
this
have
is
you-
what happens with state grants too, sometimes, you know, the money takes so long to get to you, 2 years, that
Yeah,
the process
mean-
already launched.
No, right. I mean, listen, like I said, it does take a while. I mean, that seems very, very long. I imagine you've reached out to his staff just to, yeah. Anything, yeah, I mean, Maureen has my contact, you know, I can try to reach out to just because, you know, I know him. So yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, to answer your question, Maureen, yeah, it can take a very long time. And so when you're doing government contracting on the city, state, and federal level, it's really good to take out a line of credit, right? Because you don't know if you're really depending on this funding, you don't know when it's coming in. And you know, many of us are, you know, reporting to, you know, our EDs or our board. And so waiting for that money can take a very, very long time, but it may not help when you have to operate and do the day-to-day. Michelle?
And if you have that line of credit and you've been approved, are you allowed to move forward with the project and then wait for reimbursement, or do you have to wait until it's sort of guaranteed? Like, how does that part work, or are you not sure?
No, that's a good question. No, they will allow you. They understand that the process is a slog. And so but you have to keep, I mean, that's a great question. You got to make sure you keep, you know, good receipts, you know, how much you're you know, allocating, and, you know, make sure it all lines up. But no, you won't be found you know, out of balance or yeah, so.
So the line of credit is really important. And for some organizations, I know that they just don't have access to that kind of funding, you know, for loans or whatnot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Lydia, I'm gonna just keep messing with you because you're the only one who got. So how long had you been working on this idea? And I'm asking because um you know, I don't know if you guys had considered a line of credit, you know, if you did get accepted. How long have you guys been working on this idea before you submitted?
The project was probably a good 2 years now. And they've completed part of the project that was submitted to Bowman for this ask. So to be honest with you, I don't know what has transpired. I know they were going to be in touch with them about slightly changing what we were going to use the money for compared to what I wrote in the grant, you know?
Right, just to get some funding in.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And had your organization received an earmark before?
That client, no, they hadn't. That was the first time. And
So
what you were talking about, they made a relationship with him. They went to his office, chatted with him, told him about this great workforce development program. They needed money for construction and blah, blah, blah. And he put it in.
yeah, so I forgot you said you represent clients. Yeah, so your client probably didn't consider it, because you don't, that the timeline can be, you know, very problematic, and you should consider a line of credit. You know, but like a lot of people don't. Maureen has my deck, and so, you know, I did go through the timeline. You know, you can see she'll send that, you know, right afterwards.
Yeah, we will. I got a message in the chat though. I know you did the timeline for the federal. Is it similar to the New York State legislative funding? Is the timeline similar? Or is New York State a little different?
Well, it's similar in that so the state, goes into session in January, but the thing is this is that um the session is very truncated. And so everything that I said, you got to be doing it in hyper speed and do it right now. Right now, and then also begin in January. And so, yeah, no, beginning January is the time to really, when the process will kick off. Um, as you know, many folks, take off during the summer. So what I would say is right now in the fall is the time to really, be connecting with, state staff for New York state staff members because, it's a very short time. And during this period is when staffers and, the governor staffers consider, what they want to focus on for the next legislative session. So yeah, right now is the time to really, start pitching to your different respective representative offices.
And then the other question is, since the money takes so long, it seems like it would be best to have an ask that is as general as possible. Do you agree? How do you recommend handling the ask?
Well, it's not really about um the ask. Unfortunately, it's about the process, and so I would say not be general because you don't want with anything, whether it's government, whether it's foundations, whatever, you don't want people to ask more questions, right? You want to be able for them to, it's very clear, they understand it, and they say, hey, that's great, let's fund it. If it's very general, then people will question it, and then they may start questioning your organization if you're like really for real. And so, yeah, again, it's not really about the specificity of the proposal. It's more so, unfortunately, it's just the process, which is not great. Which is not great. And it really doesn't, I mean, it really doesn't matter who's been in office, Democrat or Republican, it's just been bad.
Yeah, I know several years ago, this was a New York State Senate ask, but we got the earmark, we got okayed for it. It took 5 years before we actually got the money, and it was for a capital project. And it was a piece of the capital project that, once we got to that part, we couldn't move forward until that was done. It was an elevator to get to the second floor. So,
My God, I've never heard 5 years. Wow.
5 years it took on New York State, and part of that was because we had asked in an election year, and the climate changed in New York State during that time, and so there was a lot of back and forth. Yes, we were approved, but there was question as to whether or not it would be given. So we finally got the money, but it put a hold on our capital project. So
yeah, at that point, everyone was wearing their Fitbit and just taking the stairs. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That it leads to another question. Is the funding guaranteed? If they said that they're funding something, is it guaranteed, or can they pull that back with a new administration?
No, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I've never heard of anybody. I've heard of the funding being delayed, as Maureen said, because of different political winds. And I would say yes, they have to go through it. It just may take a little bit longer. They may just delay it. They want to look at it, re-examine it. But I can get that answer for you, and so you can share it with your group.
Thank you. Any other questions for Pernell, or comments, stories to share, experiences? I think, Pernell, thank you so much for your time and your experience and your expertise. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm sure there will be other questions. There always is a question or two after the fact, so I will share those with you.
Yeah, or you can also just share my contact. I'm happy to connect with folks directly.
Great, thank you.
Take care.
All right, thanks, Pernell. And so everybody, I guess we'll give you back a half an hour. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, enjoy the fall, and hopefully we will see all of you at the next Connections call.